Let's speak to Dr. Michael Slobodchikoff, who's a lecturer at Troy University in Alabama. He's also the author of Strategic Cooperation, Russia's Relationship with the Former Soviet States. Dr. Slobodchikoff, it's interesting. It does appear as if Russia has absolutely no friends, and it's also extremely interesting to hear how different the two sides are putting their analysis of the situation. It couldn't be more different.
It absolutely couldn't be more different. It's a story of he said, she said, and at this point, the Ukrainians will suffer because of it.
Let's pick up on a couple of points that Vitaly Churkin made. First of all, he said that Ukraine must stop waging war on its own people in the east of Ukraine. He said that Kiev must listen to pro-Russian protesters and that not listening is what's led to the bloodshed. He spoke of the henchmen of the Maidan. Of course, the Maidan is the movement that eventually toppled Viktor Yanukovych. Russia is adamant that it has nothing to do with this and that the situation can be resolved in Ukraine. And yet, if it is to be resolved in Ukraine, it looks as if it wouldn't go Russia's way. Would you agree?
I would agree with that, although I think that there's a way to resolve this rather quickly, and that is to hold a constitutional convention and to have an election in Ukraine over the idea of federalization, which Russia has proposed. If they do that, the results of that vote would be binding, and obviously you could resolve this in Ukraine. And it might definitely not go Russia's way. Absolutely.
Vitaly Churkin also said that the Western sponsors of, again, he used the phrase henchmen of Maidan, must stop associating themselves with neo-Nazis and make sure a genuine national dialogue begins. What role can the West play here in trying to keep the territorial integrity of Ukraine intact?
Well, I think the West has to begin to push the leadership the current leadership in Western Ukraine to have an election and a new constitution. I think that's the only way to gain legitimacy for Ukraine as a whole. I'm afraid what we're seeing now is the start of a civil war and the destruction of Ukraine as a sovereign state.
These militants in the east of Ukraine call the government in Kiev a junta. And you talk about elections. There is an election due in May. There's supposed to be a presidential election. Will that help legitimize the government or the new president and his policies or her policies?
I don't think so. I think before that happens, I think there has to be an election held on a constitution for Ukraine. And once that happens, then you can have a presidential election and have a legitimate government in Ukraine. At this point, if you have a presidential election, I think the East won't find that to be legitimate, and Russia won't either.
What difference do you think it makes that this Security Council meeting and all these statements from the various ambassadors is being televised around the world? People watching in eastern Ukraine, what difference will it make to them? Will it entrench the views of those who are pro-Russian? Will it help others make their minds up about where they stand? Will it make a difference?
I think what it does is it shows the different views that are out there, because I think that one of the problems is that there is a huge battle of the media over the hearts and minds of Ukrainians. And seeing this, you can see the different viewpoints that are out there. And I think that's a good thing in terms of democratic thought.
The thing about the Security Council, of course, and everyone knows this, is just a talking shop, because Russia, with its veto, will stop any moves that go against its own interests. There's been no mention of sanctions. So far, do you know if the sanctions have worked that have been imposed by the West against individuals and organizations?
I don't think the sanctions have actually worked. I think that part of the problem with the sanctions is that they've been designed to hit certain henchmen at the top of Russia's government, and Russia had new corruption laws in place anyway to try and limit property that their government officials had, as well as bank accounts that they had overseas. So the actual sanctions haven't helped yet.
What difference do you think it would make to the region if there were to be a greater federal system in Ukraine and that territories might have more powers devolved to them? Would it make any difference overall to that part of the world?
I think it would certainly make a big difference. I think that those in eastern Ukraine would feel that they have more of a stake in the government and more of a say in the federal government, and I think that that would go a long way to easing tensions. You wouldn't have the arguments against native Russian speakers that you've had currently, and a feeling that they're being that they're being put aside and their voice is not being heard. So I think that a federal system would actually go a long way to alleviating some of the issues in eastern Ukraine with the ethnic Russian minority.
Dr. Slobodchikoff, if you'd be so kind as to stay with us, we just want to play a clip of Mark Lyle Grant, the British ambassador to the United Nations, and we will come back to you. At the moment, we're watching the current president of the UN Security Council, Nigeria's Joy Ogwu, and we expect soon that Ukraine's ambassador will be speaking as well. At the moment, I believe we're going to hear from Peter Wilson, who called on Russia to remove troops from the border.